20 years ago today, remembering 9/11. Now, we all remember what happened. The planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, and what I'm going to tell you about was my experience with that. I was not there personally, however, my father was, so I have my recount of the story as well as his, as far as I remember what he had told me about it. Before we get into the story, we have to get a few things out of the way. This is not a political discussion. Mention anything regarding that, or anything else regarding it was an inside job, or a conspiracy theory, or anything else, and get banned immediately. This is no laughing matter. I don't care what your beliefs are. All we have to agree upon is that it happened. It doesn't matter how it happened, who is involved, or anything like that, just that it happened. That's all we have to agree upon, and we'll leave it simply at that. The next thing that we have to get out of the way, because this is no laughing matter, is of course a joke. Once we get that out of the way, everything is going to become very serious. Now, I had read this joke maybe couple of weeks after the actual thing happened, and it was an interesting little thing. I did a search because I vaguely remembered what it was, and I found it online, so I'm just going to read that to you because I didn't want to memorize it. I don't script any of my videos, but I did write some information down. I have 4 pages worth of information, as a matter of fact. I'm not going to be reading everything verbatim. These are just basically bullet points, and I'll fill in everything else. So anyway, the joke goes, the first divorce directly related to the September 11th terrorist attacks has been filed in a New York court. It appears a guy with an office on the 103rd floor of the World Trade Center left home for work on September 11th. When he got to Manhattan, he decided to spend the morning at his girlfriend's apartment in the Village. When he got to her place, he turned off the phones, the TV, the radio, and spent the entire morning in bed with her. At about 11 a.m., while still at her place, he turned his cell phone back on to retrieve his messages. A second later, it rang. His wife was on the phone, crying and screaming at him. "I've been trying to call you for over 2 hours. I've been worried sick about you. Are you okay?" He answered calmly that he was fine. The wife then asks, "Where are you?" The guy said, "Where do you think I am? I'm in my office." So anyway, that was the joke. Again, with all of the jokes aside and everything else, it's time to get serious with this. So it has been said by people who were around when JFK was assassinated that when they heard that news, they remembered exactly where they were, exactly what they were doing, or where they were going, or they remember exactly that moment in time when they found out that he was assassinated. It's also been said that many have remembered exactly what they were doing when they heard about the World Trade Center disaster. I'm one of those people. So, I don't remember what day it was, September 11th, 2001, excuse me. I don't remember exactly what day it was, but it was just a plain old September day. It was nice weather, if you recall. Blue skies, sunny out, white puffy clouds in the sky here and there. It was basically a beautiful day. But in September, I always get that feeling that, I don't know how to explain it, that back to school feeling. Even though I've been out of school for well over 20 years, I still get that feeling like, oh, the weather's going to get colder, back to school and all this stuff, and all the stores with all their back to school stuff and things like that. Also, I wanted to mention, before we get any further in the story, Susan immediately flagged this video. I would appreciate it very kindly if you go ahead and open up a new tab, find another one of my video, or queue another one of my videos, queue up a bunch of them, and just set that player on mute, and just let that play so I can get a little bit of ad revenue, because this video is on the house because Susan. We can talk about COVID, but we can't talk about 9/11 without the video getting flagged. Don't really know why. Because a lot more people died with COVID than they did in 9/11. So I really don't understand that. But please, if you would, this way, I can continue to bring you such great content you've become accustomed to. If you would go ahead and open up another tab there and just start playing some other videos on mute. You don't have to watch them. I'd appreciate if you would, of course, but I'd appreciate if you could do that. Thank you. So anyway, here we are, September 11th, 2001. I was working for The Wiz, which was located in Carle Place, New York. That's not far from what's called Westbury, New York. And it was from home, I'd say about 6 miles, so that would make it about 20 some odd miles from the city, 25 miles from the city, somewhere in there. It wasn't that far out east from New York City. My father, on the other hand, worked in New York City, and we're going to get back to him in a bit. So here I am driving to work. Beautiful skies, nice day, but still had that back to school feeling going on. And just driving to work, and I had the radio on in the car. I was listening to CD 101.9, Smooth Jazz. And you may remember that station from back in the day. It was a great station. The music was very calming and helped to quell any potential road rage that might occur when somebody would cut me off or anything like that. I would just smooth everything out and make it nice. And what they played was music. It was a music station. You have commercials here and there, but it was a music station. And I remember pulling into the parking lot of the Wiz. Now, I had to be there, I don't remember exactly what time. It was probably close to 9 a.m. Whatever song was on, I don't remember, but here's the moment. They cut in on the broadcast, and one of the announcers on the station said, "We've just learned that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, etc., etc." And I'm like, that's odd. Why would they interrupt this station for that? Wouldn't that be something for like a news station? That's really strange. All right, whatever. Get in the spot, throw her in park, shut her off, get out of the car, and I start walking to the building. At the Wiz, we sold TVs and VCRs and stereo equipment, you name it, that kind of stuff. Your electronics for the home. And what we had was basically what you still see today in these type of stores or any stores that would sell TVs. There's the wall-o TVs. And every TV has the same thing on. Now, back in my day, most of these TVs were CRTs. So it was still analog. And that being the case, it was actually a fair comparison. You can go into Walmart or Best Buy or anything like that, and if they have TVs playing the same stuff, you'll notice that the TVs change. Like if it goes from one cut scene to another, the TVs change at slightly different times depending on how the signal is processed. Which is also fun if you consider like the Super Bowl. Whatever team you're rooting for wins, but your neighbor who has different service finds out about it a half second before you do. TV ain't live anymore. But back in these days, it was analog TV. So every TV had exactly the same picture at exactly the same time. And you could very easily tell, well, this TV has a better picture than that one. And I walk in, and there is that picture we've all seen on the news a million times of the plane crashing into the building, the first plane. We're all standing there watching the TV, watching all of the TVs. It was surreal. It was absolutely surreal because we're watching this, but nobody's believing what they're seeing. It's, I wanted to say black and white, but it's color right there in front of you. But it was very hard to believe. We just saw it, but we're like, nah, this didn't really happen. Come on. But it did. Anyways, we normally would have, I'm just referring to my notes here, we normally would have a morning meeting. They tell us about sales numbers. They tell us about upcoming promotions, all kinds of stuff like that. Anyways, we didn't have a meeting that morning. We just stood and watched TV. And soon after 9, we learned that another plane crashed into the other tower. Oh boy, this is bad. Still in disbelief, it was getting to be time that the store opens. I did not work on the section that had the TVs. I worked all the way on the other side of the building, if I could speak straight. All the way on the other side of the building, we had computers there, but no real high-speed internet access or anything like that just yet. We had nothing. But we had a security guard, and the security guard had a portable radio that was probably owned by the store. Somehow he managed to get that, bring it over, and he plugged it in, and we kind of hung by the door where his little desk was, and he would stamp everybody's receipt taken, in quotes, because of course they were taken from buying at the Wiz. Anyway, that's a Wiz joke. So we did listen to the radio for a bit, but soon it got old. It was kind of like, oh, it's the same story all over again. There were a couple of other little incidents there. We learned that the Pentagon was also hit by a plane, and we're like, okay, this is not, something is really, really wrong. This is not normal at all. Then we heard that the South Tower collapsed, and we saw that on the TV. Some people would run back to the other side to go catch what's going on TV. But I just sort of hung over on the side where I was, and customers started coming in. It was not a busy day. It was during the week some day, whatever it was, and people would just come in off the street. Hi, I'm looking for a computer. I'm looking for a telephone. I'm looking for a fax machine. We sold office products over on that side of the store. Okay, what kind of phone are you looking for? Well, I want something cordless, blah, blah, blah. So I go through the whole selling thing. And so, okay, you going to take it? Yeah, sure. Okay, follow me. And I said, I'm sorry, I just lost my paper. Sorry about that. I would say, did you hear what's happening? What do you mean? In New York City? No, what's happening in New York City? Planes crashed into the World Trade Center? No? You haven't heard this? Okay. People who were not listening to the news or had the radio off in the car or what have you, were not in the know. And it was almost a little surprising to me. Now, the Wiz was located on a road called Old Country Road in Carl Place. And that road runs east and west. And I could walk out the door for the Wiz and go out to the road and look west. And somewhere around noon, I would see that smoke that you saw. Just barely over the trees. And I said, wow, yeah, this is really happening. But it didn't sink in yet. It didn't sink in. Sometime during the morning, before noon, between 10 and 12, I got a call from my mother. And she says, you know what's going on? I said, yeah, I saw it on TV. My dad was working that day in New York City. And she said, I got a call from your father. He's all right. I said, well, thank God for that. But then we learned that he was not all right because he had called before the towers collapsed. And I'm going to skip ahead here with my story, and then I'll get to what my dad has told me. At 10:03, a plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. There have been documentaries on TV stating numerous different things. Again, we're not going to get into any sort of theories as to what or why, but it was just funny because some lady I worked with by the name of Teresa Rivera, I remember her name, she was a fixture of the store. She had been there forever. She was a cashier, and she could bring people up left and right, and she was that old school cashier lady, probably in her 60s, pushing 70-ish, something like that. And she could be a royal bitch at times, but other times she could be a very, very sweet lady. And she would, her word was God. And basically she said, the plane in Pennsylvania, they shot it down. They'll never tell. And on TV you hear, yes, they did shoot it down. No, they didn't. There was a scuffle in the plane and they crashed in the field because they broke through to the cockpit. So whatever it was, I just figured I'd mention that because her word was God, and that was it. My work day went on, and I worked 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I had more work after work because at the time I was doing freelance computer repairs and lessons and all kinds of stuff like that. Of all people who I had scheduled for this day was my 11th grade English teacher in high school. I was well out of high school at this point. But she had used me while I was still in high school. This was also known as a big no-no. She had used me to upgrade her old Packard Bell computer that was like a 486 and make it a multimedia PC, and I installed a sound card and a faster modem, 33.6 kilobits per second. That was, pretty high end for the time. And a CD-ROM drive and a sound card and more memory and some other stuff, and there were jumpers on board. I had to set because this was not plug and play in these days. I think that machine was running Windows 3.1 still. It was still around, even though we were, well into the Windows 95 and 98 days. I think this was still a 3.1 computer, at least back in the day when I was in high school. And she had since gotten rid of that machine. I wish I could have gotten it. That would have been one of those prized possessions. It would mean something, but whatever happened to it, I don't know. She ended up getting a Dell Tower, and this thing was just not cooperating. It was buggy, it was slow, the mouse didn't want to work right, and I had to go out there that day. And I left the Wiz, and I traveled out there, and she was further east from the Wiz. So I traveled east and made my way over there, and I worked on her computer for a few hours. And this just was not the right day because of what was going on. We basically talked about what we heard and what was going on TV. people we know we heard from or didn't hear from. And I don't know that I really resolved much of the issues with that computer. It was really just an odd thing. We had this odd aura that was going on because of what was going on. Around 5 o'clock, I was pretty much done for whatever I was going to get done with. And I had known at this point that my dad was not necessarily okay, because I had heard he was, but didn't hear anything since, and that was a bit concerning. They had closed a major roadway on Long Island here called the Southern State Parkway, and this lady I did computer work for, she would have been a nice clear shot from her house back to my house, my parents' house at the time. But I couldn't take that road, so I had to take an alternate route. But regardless, I was way east of home, so I had to go back west. And west is New York City. And on this road, I had a very clear skyline, and oh yeah, you could see the black cloud in the sky going, and then it really, really sunk in. So now that I was driving home and I saw this cloud, I was really getting concerned because things were starting to really click into place. And I said, I really wonder what happened with my dad. And here is where we basically do a rewind of the entire story, and I'll kind of tell you his story, and then we kind of meet up at the end, and then I have a couple other little things. So anyway, my dad worked for IBM forever. Started in the 1970s and worked up until 2005, 6, 7, something. Long time. He worked in Manhattan, and he always, since I was born, had worked second shift. He'd leave the house at 4 to get into the city by 5. He would drive into the city, and by 5 or so, he was able to somehow find a parking spot somewhere and go about his evening working there. And he would work till 1, 12, 1 in the morning, something like that. And then the third shift guys, which basically did the overnight into the morning, would come in. So whatever the deal was, he would kind of work the evenings. Well, at some point before this whole thing happened, a couple of years actually, maybe going back as many as 4 years, because I remember being in about the 11th grade and we had to drive him to the train station. They had changed his hours to that morning shift, which was kind of your typical 9 to 5 type deal. So he now was not able to drive into New York City because it was impossible to park. Absolutely impossible to park. So he would drive into a neighboring borough of New York called Queens, where he could get the subway. Now, he could have walked to the Long Island Railroad and taken that to the subway in Queens, and then taken the subway from Queens into Manhattan and worked that way. But that proved to be too costly, so he would drive from home to Queens and get the subway there and go to work in Manhattan. And that's what he did this morning. Well, I don't remember exactly what the details were, but it seems that I believe he said he was running late that morning for whatever reason. Train wasn't on time. He missed the train. I don't know what it was. But he worked in New York City, and he had the way it worked was basically he was dispatched to all areas of Manhattan. And if he was downtown and had a call uptown, he'd have to hop on the subway and go uptown to take this call. And then he would hang around uptown until he'd find another call, maybe a few blocks away, where he could take that because he was already uptown, or sometimes he'd have to go back downtown or what have you. And at the end of the day, he would get back on the subway with a zillion other people and go back to Queens and find his car and come home. Well, he had a customer, this is what he called it. It was IBM's customer, but a customer of his that was in the World Trade Center. I don't remember time spans, what building was hit at what time, by which plane flown by which terrorist. It doesn't make a difference. But the building that he was in was not hit at the time when he got there. He had a customer on, maybe the 11th floor of this building or something like that, and they had free coffee. So every morning when he'd get in, he'd go in there, he'd say hello, he'd get his coffee, and he'd leave. And they were perfectly okay with that. So he got free coffee every day. That would be nice at your own job, right? Get free coffee every day. But because he was running late and everything else, he said, the hell with the coffee. But he was in the area of the World Trade Center. And he looked up and he saw that the other tower was on fire. The plane had already crashed while he was still on the subway, right before he got out. So he saw that and he said, that's something. That fire is bad. It's worse than I've seen, but this is nothing out of the ordinary. Because he worked in Manhattan for years, and there indeed have been fires at the World Trade Center. And there would be fire trucks and all kinds of the whole thing that we know, and they would go and put the fire out, and whatever damage happened, and that was it. You know, it was, the World Trade Center was obviously not plane-proof, but it was very resilient in many regards to weather and other normal factors. We can put it that way. So anyway, he saw that and he said, this isn't good. Well, again, I don't have full details here, but at some point during this time was when my dad called my mom and said, I'm fine. And then the other plane crashed. Don't know where he was at the time, but he certainly heard that, and the ground shook. And that building was now on fire, and he said, I think it's time I get out of this area. And he started walking. Because where are you going to go? You know, he said, I'll just walk south of here or something. I don't know where he went, but he was just getting out of there, no matter what. We have seen on the news when the building came down, the first building came down, and you've seen that scene where the people are running and there's that huge white cloud that is coming after them with such force, and they're all going to get enveloped in that. And my dad was one of those people. Everybody's panicking. Nobody knows what's going on. And everybody has their shirt over their face to try to, filter out the dust in the air and stuff like that. Nobody had masks or anything like that because there was no COVID or anything. Basically, he was stuck in that. And this was, if you've ever spoken to anybody who was in this, It was basically you were unable to breathe. It was that thick, that dense, that bad. People were scrambling for cover, and my dad did that. He tells me that he found himself inside an ATM vestibule with as many people as they could possibly squeeze into that ATM vestibule. I don't know how big this was or anything like that, but most banks have the two doors, and you would normally pull them, and they have like a felt strip in between or something, and if they're usually metal, thick glass doors kind of thing. You know, every bank is different, but you kind of get the idea. The felt does not make a perfect seal. Basically, they're in there, and the entire window of the door and any other windows in this vestibule were completely white, and people were banging on the door, trying to get in, trying to get in, trying to get in, and they were basically, the people in there were barricading the doors because they did not want them to open and let more of this white stuff in. But some people persisted and they slammed against the door and whatever it was, and some people squeezed in or whatever, and they're standing in there, and things are very, very grim at this point. People are now starting to recite the Lord's Prayer. I'll leave that up to your interpretation, but they were starting to recite that in unison. That was a little bit touching and scary. At some point, the air quality in this ATM vestibule had become so bad that it was almost no different than just being outside. So they decided to leave. Now, when you have people packed like sardines into an ATM vestibule, you can open both of these doors, but people have to sort of funnel their way out. So it's not a smooth, couple people going in and out during the day. You had to wait, and people are slow, people are grabbing their stuff, people are this and that. But in the hectic environment this was, they would leave things behind. My dad happened to notice somebody left a cell phone on the windowsill. And he said that might be important, and he took it. Now you might say, well, the guy might have come back for it. He was not coming back for that phone. He was not going to be coming back for that phone, believe me. It was that bad. The point was to get out of there. He doesn't care what happened to the phone as long as he ends up with his life. Okay? So he took that guy's phone. Didn't end up using it because, if you recall, the cell towers were basically jammed with so many people making phone calls that the towers just could not handle the sheer volume of calls at that time. Let's see here. My dad made his way from building to building to try to get away from this white cloud that was there. And it eventually just got so bad that no matter how far away he got, he couldn't escape this. And it was impossible to breathe. Again, you've all seen this on the news or the documentaries or anything like that. He had learned that many people were crossing the Brooklyn Bridge on foot. And he said, well, Brooklyn is probably a safe bet at this point, so let me get out of New York City and go into Brooklyn. He started heading for the Brooklyn Bridge on foot, and he was walking there, and somewhere along the way, he bumped into, whatever you want to call it, this kind of short, older Russian lady. and she was complaining, "I can't breathe, I can't go on, I can't make it, I can't do it, I'm gonna die." And my dad took it upon himself to force this lady to persevere. And he took a perfect stranger by the hand and said, "Come with me. We're going to cross the bridge into Brooklyn." And he took this lady and consoled her, and they walked over the Brooklyn Bridge. And she made her way, as did my dad, safely to Brooklyn, where things were not anywhere near as bad. Over the bridge was a post office in Brooklyn, and my dad says that they had brought out their 5-gallon jugs of water from their water coolers. They had stockpiles of water in there, and they had cups, and they were giving out free water to people, and my dad graciously accepted some of that water and gave some to the nice lady that he helped cross with him. And that was a much needed drink in that cloud of stuff. Anyways, I heard on the news also that there were, at this time, deviously enterprising individuals, shall we say, who had bottles of water. And they started selling that water to people on the bridge or near the bridge or over the bridge, or those who didn't notice that the post office had water or anything. And they were selling bottles of Poland Spring water for $5 a bottle. This was in 2001. So that's, I don't know, $7.50, $8 today. And people would gladly pay that money. But seriously, when you think about it, that's a scumbag move. Very enterprising, but a scumbag move. There were other individuals that were even more enterprising, and these are very rare because there were very few of them made, but some people had in their apartment in Manhattan or in Brooklyn or wherever it was a t-shirt printing business. Like this shirt, for example, is just a plain old black t-shirt, and the white was printed on there with like screen printing or something, and they had all the equipment to do that. And they drew up a quick sketch that had the Twin Towers there and some planes like buzzing around, and it said "Terror at the Towers." You can Google image that if you'd like. There are very few of them because very few were made, and it's probably not a shirt you'd be proud to wear at this time. I think right after this, if I recall, was the start of people wearing the American flag pin, and that was really nice, and that went on for several years. Anyway, my dad finally made his way into Brooklyn, like I said, and got into the subway there, took the subway back to Queens, got in his car, and drove home. He escaped with his life, and that was the ultimate prize. My cousin, who was either in Brooklyn or New Jersey at the time, I can't remember which, was ready to drive and pick him up, but my dad was able to go and find his way home somehow in all of this mess. So that didn't happen, but I remember hearing that. I was still out fixing that lady's computer. My dad had gotten home somewhere during that time. And he came home. Everything was covered in that white dust. All of his clothes, himself, his briefcase, the stuff inside his briefcase, the car, because he had to drive home, was covered in this white dust. and it was absolutely awful. He came home, he rang the bell, and my mother opened the door, and of course she was very glad to see him. He said, "Come to the backyard and hose me down." And that's exactly what she did. She hosed him down in the backyard. uh, anyway, just to get the bulk of it off before he went into the house, and my dad tells me that once he did that, he peeled off his clothes and everything, and he came in and he took the equivalent of 5 showers. That's how long he was in the shower for, is what he said. Anyways, somewhere in the midst of this, I had gotten home from fixing that lady's computer. And I walked into the living room, which was the room that you walk into when you go into that house. And I saw a sight that I did not normally see. The living room was set up where there's a big picture window, as you would expect in a living room, and the couch is there. And off to one side of the room, there were 3 chairs that you could sit in. They were, one was a recliner chair like I'm in now, but the other 2 were just kind of these chairs that would swivel or whatever. All of these had arms on the chair. And I walked in, and my dad was sitting in the first chair. And that was an odd place for him to sit, because when my grandmother was still alive and she would visit on weekends, that was her chair. So it was very rare that he would ever sit in that chair, not because Grandma would sit there all the time. It looked the comfiest, it looked the coziest, it was the closest to, I don't know why, but he was sitting there, and he was like clutching the arms of the chair, and he was sitting there. I walked in, and it looked like he just got run over by a train. I have never seen my father in that shape. That was really something. And I heard his story, and I heard of all of that, and man oh man, that was really, really scary. We have some other information regarding this, not directly related to that. One of my uncles was also working in New York City on September 11th, and he personally witnessed people jumping out of the World Trade Center towers and falling to their untimely death. He watched people fall to their death. That is a sight that you can never unsee. So that was a little weird. Making phone calls to people you know, your neighbors, anything like that. Find out, is everybody all right? Things like that. A childhood friend of mine who lived on the next block, who we lost touch over the years, but my parents still knew his parents, and it turns out his mother was in the World Trade Center when it was hit by one of the planes. She did escape, but broke her arm in the process. I guess that's a small price to pay, but still a little close to home that a neighbor was there and that happened. So that was also scary. So the next thing was that cell phone that my dad found in the ATM vestibule. It was now the next day, and they they didn't know what to do about this phone because my dad didn't need it anymore. He had no use for it because he escaped. Um, so he sort of wanted to return it to its rightful owner. In these days, there were no smartphones, and a lot of times phones were unlocked. There was no PIN, or people didn't set them up, or anything like that. They were flip phones with black and white screens on them. And that's the kind of phone this was. As such, the phone fortunately still had battery power. And my mother was saying, what do I do? How do we get this back? I said, well, you could try. Do you know the number of this phone? She said, no. I said, let me take a look. And I went through, and he had contacts in the phone book on this phone. You could program people's number in like you do today. I said, pick up the house phone and start dialing people. And she said, what do you mean? I said, just call. Whoever picks up, just say, hi, listen, I'm sorry to bother you. You don't know who I am, but do you have a friend who was, or a family member, who was in New York City yesterday and lost their cell phone? Now, this could be anybody, and anybody could say, yeah, I lost a phone, but these were people that whoever owned this phone knew. So chances are they were either family or friends or maybe coworkers, generally people who are not out to screw him over. And she got down maybe 2 or 3 on the list and said, oh yes, that's my friend Craig. He was there. He lost a phone. And he called me, and he told me that he lost his phone, and he already called up and he canceled service on it. Well, we have his phone. My husband found it in an ATM vestibule while he was there and took it just in case, but didn't end up using it at all. I was wondering if there would be a way that we could return this if you need it back. Oh, let me get in touch with him, and I will have him call you. And sure enough, sometime later, the phone rang, and my mother picked up and spoke to the guy, and of course, they exchanged stories and that. And my dad wanted to sort of set this thing up where they would meet at a restaurant or something in New York City and both talk and exchange stories about what happened that day as sort of a catharsis for what happened. But the guy really was not interested in that. He just was interested in the phone, getting the phone back. And, he basically said, please ship it to me and I will gladly pay the postage on it. They got his address and they shipped it out and never bothered to call the guy for payment of, the cost to ship it. It was under $20 for sure. It was, a nominal amount of money really, so it wasn't a big deal. So my dad was now sort of out of work, as one of his customers was in World Trade, which no longer was there. And the other customers that were there, considering the fact that he was directly involved with this whole thing in that big cloud and all that stuff, work gave him some time off, and they said, go see a doctor and this and that. And he went to see a doctor, and he came home with one of those lung capacity tester machines, something like that you blow into and the balls go up in it. So you can see how well they're breathing or anything like that. And he was weak from that, but did get better as the days went on. So chances are very good he probably still has that little toy as a memento bumming around somewhere or something like that. Let's see. As a result of that, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, I don't know what it was, They said, considering the fact that you were there and directly involved with this, would you be interested in a position on Long Island? After, I don't know, 30 years with the company, something like that, they finally offered to move him to Long Island where he lived. This was a bit of a change of pace because everything required driving to, and you would deal with typical Long Island traffic every day, all day. And he did accept the offer and now worked on Long Island. The jobs were spread out. Some were way far east, and some days he really had to drive out some ways. So now he was really racking up mileage on the car, but considering all the years where he didn't, because Queens was really not that far from the house, considering where some of these places could be. That was that. And so the mileage that he racked up was only for a few years until he retired, and that was pretty much that. But he basically got to live out his final days with the company in the country club, if you will. It was not as fast paced as New York City. This is my own opinion of that. A lot of times he was stationed at a particular place, and he was stuck in this same hellhole every day, 5 days a week. And the division of IBM that he was in was sort of getting sold off to, I think, a company called RICOH, RICOH. You may have heard of them at the time. So I think at the very end he was actually property of RICOH, but still had an affiliation with IBM. I don't remember exactly how all of that works. On September 11th, later that night, 5:20 p.m., 7 World Trade collapsed due to everything that went on with the other buildings and the fire that it was, because it was on fire in that, and it finally collapsed. Because at the time my dad was still in New York City, he did have an office that it was in a customer's building. It wasn't an IBM building, but they had a little office space there, and he had a desk or a cubicle or something like that where he could put his stuff, sort of a home base, if you will, where he could stay there if there were no calls or whatever. I guess he had a computer terminal there or his laptop or something like that at the time. To this day, 20 years later, if you talk to him about this incident, he will mention the umbrella and the several cases of soda cans that he had lost that were in his office because the building collapsed. 20 years later, he still talks about the umbrella and the cases of soda. So that's kind of funny. I told you about earlier a childhood friend's mother who broke her arm in that. Some guy that I worked with at the Wiz, his father unfortunately perished in the whole disaster that was there. He was upset about it, but also not terribly upset about it, which was a little strange to me. I don't know if his parents had split up and he didn't really talk to his dad much, or what the deal was, if he was maybe estranged from him, or maybe he wasn't and just didn't care. That could be, because he sort of had that type of attitude at work where he really didn't care about anybody. So maybe that was it, but he was shooken up. I mean, it's direct blood, so that was that. And finally, that was really almost the end of the story. Until about a week later or so, maybe 2 weeks later, I can't remember. It was a Sunday morning. Sunday mornings are quiet, usually. People go to church on Sundays. Not as many cars on the road. You know the deal. Typical Sunday morning. And he was sleeping in a bit. I don't remember what time it was. I had to work at the Wiz. So anyways, I had sort of woken up, and I was still laying in bed myself. And remember, this is about 2 weeks later. And out of nowhere, there was a huge explosion. Boom! The windows on the house shook. Okay, that's not good. What the hell was that? Then you start hearing police sirens, fire truck sirens, ambulance sirens. Boom! Another explosion. More sirens. More emergency vehicles. Everything like that. My dad tells me that he was cowering in bed under the covers because it felt like we were under attack again. And I could certainly understand and respect that, considering what he had been through. It so turns out this was a much more innocuous thing. A few blocks away, more than a few, but still relatively close, within walking distance, I'll put it that way. Some house had a person who was somewhat disabled, and they were on oxygen to breathe. Somehow, some way, they had an oxygen tank stored out back, and that exploded. And the house caught fire, and that's all the fire trucks and all that. And there was another tank that exploded, and that was the second explosion. So that was the explanation for it, and that really is it. It was a harrowing time. Out of this whole thing, there was a lot of America sticking together. We all sort of united again. America was friendly. America, people, no matter race, religion, anything else, you'd say hi. You'd talk to other people. You'd be kind to other people because you were lucky to be alive. And it was a great time to be alive because you were still alive and didn't perish in that complete and total disaster that happened. That went on for some time, and again, we had the American flag pins, and there were a few holdouts that to this day still wear them, or maybe they wear them on or around September 11th. I had one, and I proudly wore it back in the day as well. But there were indeed some holdouts for many years who would still wear them. And I do applaud that. So if you do have one, please go ahead and wear it today. So it turns out that today is a regular video that I post, and it is September 11th, and it happens to be 20 years, so it was a good time to tell this story. That's really about all I have on this. I'm sure a lot of you have your own story that you'd like to tell, and you may do so in the comments. I'm not really going to have much to say to it. I'll read what you have to say. I may or may not reply. I don't know, but I will certainly read if you post a comment about your 9/11 story. I'm just glad, and I hope for everybody watching that nobody was hurt, injured, or killed in this disaster. And that really is it. If you have a story, like I said, you can post that in the comments below. Otherwise, that's all I have for you. So there's no real official ending to this except to just say thank you very much for watching. Make sure that you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.